let's move on to the topic I'm really keen to talk to you about, because I know you're quite passionate about it, and that's something we've touched on a few times, which is IT hygiene. Right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. Before we do, I'll give you my definition of IT hygiene, and then I'll turn to you to kind of talk to me about why you're so passionate about it. So for me, IT hygiene is all about fixing the basics. And people talk about personal hygiene, brushing their teeth, and a basic level of physical fitness and mental health and all that sort of stuff. Kind of keeping yourself and those around you kind of healthy. It translates into IT in terms of knowing the kit you've got and knowing it's healthy and that it's up to date and it's patched and all that sort of stuff. But that's kind of my definition. What's your view on this term, and why are you so passionate about it, Tom?
My definition is really similar to yours. The analogy with personal hygiene is really what fits for me. Knowing what you've got, knowing it's healthy, it's about playing well with others and being able to socialize our solutions across businesses in a way that's attractive. If you think of all the times that we talk about hygiene, it's for health, it's for attractiveness, it's for, I think your reference of mental health is really important. It's much easier to think well of yourself if you've had a shower today, if you've brushed your hair, if you've kept everything in order. And letting IT hygiene not just talk about how we keep things running and how we present them, it gives us value in businesses. It lets us really portray the work we're doing in a positive light. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. It's meant to stand proud behind a solution and show that you can interrogate it, and then put a bit of transparency in place. If something is clean and tidy and in good order, and you can present it as it is to the business, it costs less money to run, takes less effort to make changes to it. It behaves more predictably when we're, trying to build parallel solutions or work next to it. And it's just an easier life for everyone.
It feels to me like a basic foundation, right? Is that you can't. It's another analogy I like to use in architecture. You may use this as well. It's kind of like building architecture and building houses, right? I mean, I remember when I was doing a transformation project and we were moving to Office 365, and the kind of Active Directory and things like that were like, I kind of explained that they're like the foundations of the house, and like we can't start building the kitchen and various things on top of it. And yes, you can choose to have kind of like a modular sort of Huff house or something where you've got like pre-built SaaS applications or whatever, or we can do some custom development. So like in this instance, we wanted to build a really specific HR experience for our employees. So we did some custom development rather than just picking an off-the-shelf HR sort of portal. So we had like bits of Office 365, and I described those as like kind of most prefab pieces, and then another piece which was like a kind of bespoke kitchen or whatever. And that talking to other stakeholders in that sort of terms, they really understood then. Oh, okay, yeah, we've got to invest more money in the custom thing, because if I was doing that at home in my house, I think parallels and analogies are so helpful, aren't they, in the architect world?
I think you're calling out some of the areas where actually hygiene is really hard. It's really attractive at the moment that we have conversations wrapped in identity and really big principles like that. If you look back on your examples, and I have similar ones, doing an old Windows 7 upgrade, we copied people's SID data around, which today I would just not consider doing it.
Yeah.
It's just too messy. Again, previously an Office 365 migration, and I think Azure AD has let us get away with some poor IT hygiene activities in the last few years, and we're about to run out of playtime in that area. But certainly finding thousands of contacts from old Exchange migrations that have gone in the past is a classic thing, and we don't have the right language to. We talk about hygiene tasks. We don't turn around and show people that the things they ask us to do sometimes are unhygienic. And I think when you describe them that way, people are a little bit more willing to pay attention to them. And obviously the other analogy is we call it technical debt quite often.
Yes.
I think people have this tendency to think of it as technical, not debt. And for me, holding on to, we can do this, we could do it properly, the impact that you're avoiding is almost always time or cost, which are both cost. And someone should be paying somewhere. Whether we pay today or pay in the future, it's still debt.
I'm glad you raised technical debt, because no, I'm totally with you. And I've almost got to the point now where I'm going to start calling it organizational debt, because actually it's not always technical. It's sometimes business decisions.
Yeah.
It can be M&A, right? It can be a merger where they decide not to fully integrate the HR structure. Well, fine, but then that has implications on the technology. Like you've now got multiple ADs or a complicated forest or wherever it might be. And actually, you could, someone might go, well, that's technical debt. I go, well, actually, no, because the business imposed certain constraints on us. Or it might be that they decided not to automate a process because of the cost of doing that. Well, that was an organizational decision. So I think the debt piece is really helpful, because it helps you understand that, the financial kind of analogy is, if you just keep spending, your credit card just gets maxed out.
Yeah.
And I don't think we really, I totally agree with you. I don't think we play enough on that debt bit. People kind of get hung on with, as soon as anyone hears the word technical, they go, oh, well, I don't understand it. Or some people do. I'm making sweeping generalizations. And I think you're right. I think almost project debt or program debt or organizational debt might be a better term. And then within that, there's technical debt. There's decisions where a programmer put something together and they didn't, fully break down the code so it was properly object orientated, or there was a project to integrate two systems and they decided to use CSV rather than API. There definitely is technical debt, but then there's also debt that we've just sort of had to carry because the businesses wanted us to do something that we're perhaps not 100% happy with.
I think we have challenges today around how hard it is for the wrong owner to understand the debt. And I think when you try and split out who's created it, what the reason behind it was, and what we do to get out of it, if it's in the wrong place, it just accumulates. And we've both said, if you call it technical debt, it naturally gets put onto IT teams. Where if you can
fix it, it's your problem, guys. Yeah.
If you can show that there's organizational debt versus IT debt, and often one, if you're lucky enough to have a technical debt record, one of those could be split into one each of organizational and IT debt. You get traction, right? If you hand everything that might be called technical debt to an IT department, I guarantee almost anyone's going to be overwhelmed, because it will be a long list, and it'll be a long list of things that they don't have the skills to fix.
Or the manpower and budget, because no one's really recognised how big of a problem it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. The number of times you end up in conversations in architecture of, if you gather that information when you hire someone, we can automate that process down the line. That gets translated into, well, we don't automate new hires, and it's an IT issue. There's never been a successful way for IT to understand the employee type that's coming into their system without someone feeding in at the beginning. And I see that get called technical debt every time it crops up. And the technical aspect is off the shelf these days in a lot of cases, but the business process of creating a role, filling it with a head is always on us at the same time.
You've touched on what I think is one of the most problematic areas in most large organizations, and that's the JML, the joiners, movers, leavers process. Right. I don't think I've worked in many organizations that have got that right. I think if you were to sort of, not know a company, but make a wild guess about where most of the issues might be, particularly in the space that we're talking about around kind of end user, I would start there. Right? How are you managing the onboarding, almost the employee life cycle, the employee life through the company? Are they accruing additional credentials and additional admin rights with different permissions throughout their career because they're changing jobs? And then when they leave, are they fully offboarded off of cloud, off of on-prem, off of edge, off of all kinds of different devices and systems properly? I think in most organizations there's so much scope there, isn't there, for improvement? Because let's face it, it's not just the business world that's moved on with M&A and divestments and other things. It's also the technology world has rapidly changed. Like cloud just kind of came in and everyone's got to adopt it. Azure AD, sometimes it works beautifully if your AD is nice and pure, which most organizations isn't. So how do you then make the cloud sort of sync with on-prem, and now with hybrid, if you think about now where we are, right? We went remote for a bit. I know not everyone did, but the people that could went remote for quite a bit. Now we're starting to talk about hybrid. Now is where I think we're going to start to see some of these sort of syncing issues between on-prem and cloud and various things like that start to kind of rear their ugly head, I suspect, because people will go, well, I want to better go in and out of the office and have the same experience at home and work. And some organizations can support that because they've invested and they've got rid of those technical debt issues. Others are just going to run into them, I think, left, right, and center over the next few months. What are your thoughts on that one?
I mean, I think what's interesting is the transient bit in the middle where lots of people went remote and then lots of people have come back. I think for some organizations where whatever their approach to, the peak of the COVID challenges was, and I say that very optimistically as if we're past everything that is changed. Fingers crossed. The idea that you can go back from some of those things was baked in, and they haven't always been true. We've certainly had to take the step to go very pure Azure AD in our device management. So we've moved from a hybrid model to an almost purely cloud model for one part of our strategy.
Right.
I think it's those scenarios, that's something I would consider a pretty hygienic decision, right? In the modern world, that is definitely the next step. All of our strategies say we should do it. I believe very strongly we took a step forward. But if you leave people behind and you then have to reintegrate and resync, you leave yourself with exactly the same type of technical debt. And it's very hard. It's very hard for businesses to see that happen the other way around. We're traditionally used to a business decision driving work in IT that perhaps IT can't fund. We're very much not used to IT driving work in the business that the business can't fund. And I think that's a really new problem. Trying to show people that we're sorry, we have to deliver your equipment to you in a remote way because it's not safe for you to come in. We don't want you to, or we've lost access to office space. In an international company, probably all or more of the above. The business don't get to challenge us on it. But we have basically said, your apps are too old, you can't have them anymore. Your business processes have to change. And they assumed that IT would fix remote work on their behalf.
It's interesting because we did a report actually about how the pandemic has empowered IT. And it's interesting to hear you say things like that, because I think it has been a real opportunity to go, do you know what? We've been telling you for a long time that hybrid working and remote work is totally possible, but you've got to adopt it properly. You've got to plan it properly. You've got to invest in it properly. And it's almost like now it's the perfect opportunity to go, do you know what? You've seen the power of it, guys. You've seen how this can work, but it absolutely isn't a stopgap that you're now going to 180 from and go back to how you were working before. And this is my concern is I think there was I know not necessarily our customers, but conversations I've had, that people have almost made these assumptions that, oh, it's just going to be a few weeks. Oh, it's just going to be a few months. Oh, maybe it'll be until next year. The problem with that sort of creeping sort of scope, time-bound creep is that all of a sudden it's a classic, oh, it's just going to be a stopgap, turns into BAU. And it then becomes embedded in and foundational in how you run the business. It's like, well, hang on, how did we go from something we said was only going to be a stopgap for a few weeks, and now like all of our business is running off of that platform? Or, that workaround we decided was a bit of a risk. Security signed it off only because it was going to be a few months until we all return to the office. There's some of these really difficult conversations we're going to need to have, I think, with stakeholders now to say, do you know what, there's a bunch of things we really need to seriously discuss. And okay, if you don't have the budget to fund them, that's fine, but you at least need to recognize the risk and the organizational / technical debt that we've now built up as a result of moving to hybrid without perhaps some of the foundational pieces in the right places.
Yeah, and I think you talk about that time-bound sense. IT has always talked about the opportunity for remote work. We touched really quickly at the beginning around that idea of video calling. I've been in the EUC space for pretty much the whole of my career.
Right.
Just 2 years ago, introducing people to video calling and really hoping that they might think about turning their cameras on, versus beginning of last year, where it was quite often the only time some people saw people. We were pulled, right? IT was pulled into delivering future strategies at really short notice. But they were always strategies that we had. Almost everyone knew that this technology would be brought to bear at some point. And it's the worrying idea that we go back and we undo what most of us would call a success is really challenging. I find it really hard when people ask to go back to the way of working they had before, when what they did was still possible. We've in most cases not taken anything away.
Just modernized it.
It's modernized it. And I think we've used a lot of anecdotes, and anecdotes in this space are really pervasive. You think of the last few years where we've had all sorts of, identity will be the new perimeter, and
Yeah.
I mean that's the one that always sticks in my head more than anything, because when we were hybrid and when we were running on-premise AD and all the technology that we've had to put an end of life day on, it didn't make any sense. It wasn't possible. We'd never planned identity in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we've really had to step on consumer technology, and every conversation has zero trust in it somewhere at the moment. It becomes the de facto starting point for a conversation. It becomes, can we do that? Is it safe? Have you assumed that we can put an engineer in that building? And to some of the stuff at the beginning of our conversation, there's the difference between architecting remote working and engineering remote working. It's very possible to expand your VPN capacity. It's very possible to post a laptop and an admin password to someone, but it isn't necessarily right or safe or cost effective or any of the other things that we get tasked with planning for a business. And I think the other thing that is proving really hard in most conversations I have is explaining that we can't run at that speed forever. We pulled a lot out to save people's work when the pandemic first hit, and someone has to accept that change has come, and not everything can be crisis management or major incident level response. And I think that's really unpalatable to go from, yeah, sure, we'll knock that in a week, to perhaps we should go back to write requirements documents, guys.
I mean, the analogy that's springing to mind there is running, right? Is like effectively everyone was forced to sprint 100 meters to get the business from there to there really fast, but to continue to ask the IT department to sprint 100 meters. No, we now need to flip back to marathon pace. We need to put sustainable strategies in for our organizations that are going to work for the next 5-10 years, knowing that this is essentially the future of work, right? And so, yeah, forcing everyone to continue sprinting to deliver tactical kind of goals at the expense of a sustainable technology foundation and key part of your operating model. I completely agree with you. I think it's but also the other thing I suppose it's opened people's eyes to is, if you manage the governance right and you manage the bureaucracy and the change control in the right way, you can push things through quickly when you need to, right? You can hit that emergency red button when you need to, and it's about having the right bits of your platform and your architecture so that you can do that. But at the same time, you can't be changing everything all the time, and you can't be implementing new things, not only because the IT team can't keep up, the business can't either, right? I mean, you need to focus as much, I'm sure, I'm preaching convert here, I'm sure, but for me, it's always as much about adoption and sort of change management as it is about putting new devices in people's hands or putting new apps in people's hands. So actually, you have to be really grown up and say, how much change can my organization even ingest, let alone how much can we sweat the IT team to deliver it? That's one thing, it's a problem. The other thing is, you're not going to be able to absorb this, guys. If we keep changing some of this stuff, people can get really confused about where they communicate with each other, or where the knowledge management system is that they should use, or where is the order process, or whatever. It's just too much for people, particularly when you can't get everyone in a room and go, guys, girls and girls, this is where it's going to be. You're having to do all of this remotely, and there's an awful lot of fatigue of doing messaging in that way.
But I think, sorry to talk over you. I think it's important that we recognise that you spin all of this conversation off questions around hygiene, and I think if you pull back to using the analogies, if you go off sprinting for a while, you get fatigue. You have to stop and shower yourself off. This sense of hygiene and health and the people driving IT is really important. Hygiene tasks are quite often menial. They're quite often simple, but with a huge impact. You take things like the example I always like to use is, you can keep pumping disk into your file servers forever, and eventually you'll just be spending money on disk and you won't know what it's for anymore.
Yeah.
Or you can task someone with keeping that solution clean, and you can task IT, and eventually one of our entry-level staff will delete something really important, generate cost, or you can task your data owners, and it'll take a lot longer, and they'll have to do it and fold that into their business costs, but you don't have the risk, and we can call it business hygiene, not IT hygiene.
Yeah, it's kind of data hygiene, isn't it? But again, people go, "Oh, data, that's technical. That means the IT department takes care of that for us." So no, I think you've started to touch on another topic area I'm really passionate about, which is this whole compute is cheap myth, right? Because yeah, in theory it is, and yeah, you can kind of outsource problems, can't you? Oh yeah, storage, cloud can sort that. Unlimited amount of storage or unlimited amount of compute. True, but then don't come moaning back to me and that the Opex bill has gone from here to here. And by the way, also, if you're now operating in a context, which we are, of green recovery, and you've got people asking questions about your energy bill, and you're just going, well, we just throw compute at the problem. People go, well, hang on, isn't that very energy intensive? Wouldn't it make more sense to actually identify what your computers are doing, what level are they operating at, and do you actually need to upgrade people's machines, or do you need to give additional capacity to servers or buy more cloud storage? Because actually you've got better visibility of what you've already got. Actually, sometimes maybe cloud isn't the right answer. Maybe you've got some existing investment in storage, long-term storage, and actually that's more cost effective and more environmentally sound to do that. So I think these sort of assumptions that we can just get a credit card out, a corporate credit card out, and just buy more stuff, and essentially just, again, I suppose it ties into the debt conversation again, doesn't it? Because we've got our kind of credit card out, but we also need to get our technical and environmental debt and organizational debt credit card out at the same time and go, right, okay, I'm spending with the right hand, but on the left hand, I'm also incurring future problems to resolve.
Yeah, and it's the future problems aspect that I think, we need to bring this hygiene concept into every single plan. We have this amazing language to talk about how we budget for things and how we incur cost and how long that cost is relevant to our business. But in all the examples we just come from, and if I look back on how we've had to talk about data in the last couple of years, GDPR was a huge impact, data privacy has been a huge impact, the rise in security breaches has been a huge impact.
Yep.
Get the hygiene task in of don't hold on to files and data that you don't need. All of those items were simpler, cheaper, and that, you called it fixing the basics. All of those things are fundamental tenets of running an IT infrastructure. Yeah. If we're storing files, at some point we have to recognize they're there and manage them. So if you cut the load in half, then you cut the price, the effort, the time. It's a universal improvement, and that's why I'm so passionate about it. You have to show people that patching things over the top, and it's a dangerous word to use in IT, but that deal with it when it becomes a problem is a bit of a false economy when you could cut all your potential problems in half by doing the unattractive bit. And I think that's why it gets lumped into that hygiene. It's never attractive. It's never a direct benefit. Someone's already covered it from a budget that's got other things to pull on it. But I think it's a really smart investment for IT teams to just go and, set a baseline, have an attitude of clean it as you pick it up, having
that maturity to sort of just treat it with respect and not kind of. Because I think there's also a tendency for the business, but also sometimes for IT leaders to kind of get a little bit distracted by the next shiny thing that we do, right? I mean, I guess it's called Magpie syndrome, isn't it? Like, oh, shiny new project or business initiative, got to jump on that. It's got to impress the business, got to keep the C-suite happy. So let's keep delivering this change and the shiny stuff to the business. But hang on, there's a lot of stuff that's not really shiny over here. It's actually starting to smell pretty bad. Oh, no, don't worry about that. We'll just carry on with the shiny stuff. So no, I think you're right. I mean, a mature, well-run, well-managed IT function or digital function or whatever you want to call it in your organization is definitely kind of keeping an eye on that stuff, right? And because you and I, as we discussed, we both know that if you don't look after those basics, it's essentially going back to that house analogy again. You're not maintaining your foundations. You're letting them get waterlogged. The house is going to subside at some point. And the really nice, bedroom and ensuite bathroom you put on the top floor, great. But by the way, the whole house is now subsiding. So do you really want to use them still? Probably not.
Yeah.
But no, Tom, it's been a great conversation. I love the analogies and the way we've hopefully brought it to life for people that maybe aren't specialists in the area, which is what we love to do on Architect Tomorrow. What we love to do is discuss issues that architects relate to, but also do it in a way that, you know, other people who are perhaps adjacent to the architecture profession, who are looking to get into the architecture profession, start to understand some of the terminology and some of their mindset and what drives us as architects to fix things. So this has been a great conversation. So thanks so much. I'm sure it's not the last, well, hopefully it won't be the last one. I'd love to get you involved in some more things. So if you can, that would be amazing. But yeah, with that, Tom, thanks very much for your time. It's been great.
No problem. Cheers, Oliver. Great to be here. Thanks.